Hello, and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I am producing covering the various deities in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Last time, I kicked off October with a discussion of Abomination Vaults, one of the most popular starting points for GMs and players in the PF2E system. Today, I'll be hopping back into a discussion of Pathfinder's gods with my first discussion of the Outer Gods, with Nhimbaloth. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rundown. Nhimbaloth, who is often called the Empty Death, is an outer goddess, meaning she is part of the inscrutable pantheon of eldritch horror deities of the Dark Tapestry, inspired by the tales of H.P. Lovecraft. However, unlike characters like Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth, who were imported to the Pathfinder lore from the public domain, Nhimbaloth is the creation of James Jacobs, creative director at Paizo. While Nhimbaloth is, by her nature as an outer goddess, inherently unknowable to some degree, she has several recognized areas of concern. Her areas of interest are swamps, the consumption of souls, Will-O-Wisps, and the creation of undead, especially incorporeal undead. She is rarely worshipped outside of her dedicated clergy or cultists, though individuals who dwell in swamps or bogs might be drawn to her faith. Describing Nhimbaloth's physical form is challenging, as she is largely defined by having abandoned her physical form and becoming incorporeal long ago. Her presence has been entirely ethereal or astral ever since, something which many of her followers see as a sign of her power and versatility. Still, her form can be perceived by physical senses on the rare occasion when her power surges, and it has been described as an undulating mass of dark blue liquid, from which tentacles emerge in all directions. One key identifying feature which sets Nhimbaloth apart from her fellow eldritch horrors are her tentacles. Each one splits near the end into 7 smaller tentacles, which vaguely mimic the appearance of fingers. Her eyes are also unique, as they take on the form of shining yellow 4-pointed stars. While not entirely reflective of her real-world appearance, her cultists have embraced a second image representative of the Empty Death. This depiction shows Nhimbaloth as a bone-thin humanoid woman of blue ghostly visage. Her face is featureless, except for a huge 4-pointed star in the center, which functions as her eye. This form is covered in writhing tentacles, all of which end in those same 7 tentacled fingers I mentioned earlier. Nhimbaloth makes her home on a dead planet in the Dark Tapestry of the material plane. The original name for this planet, the name which its native inhabitants once called it, has been long forgotten by all but Nhimbaloth herself. Today, it is known only as Voidbracken, and is a rogue planet, meaning it orbits no star and instead travels through space untethered. Voidbracken moves according to Nhimbaloth's will and serves as the anchor for her presence, as her ability to interact directly with the material plane seems to be at least partially limited to within a certain distance of the planet. This doesn't extend to her ability to provide spells to followers, however, as, like other gods, that extends all across the great beyond. Devout followers of Nhimbaloth are almost universally cultists, and basically always practice their religion in secret. Broadly speaking, there are 2 general types of people who worship Nhimbaloth: those who seek oblivion and those who seek power. The oblivion seekers are generally those who fear the afterlife. Nhimbaloth promises an empty death to her followers, meaning absolute destruction of their souls, with no opportunity for judgment from Pharasma. These individuals typically fear just punishment for their actions, or are simply paranoid enough to embrace nothingness over the outside chance of eternal torment. The power seekers are those individuals who see the desperation of the first group and seek to prey upon it, or see Nhimbaloth's own relatively unrestrictive edicts and see an opportunity to accumulate divine power in her service. These individuals are more likely to twist faith in the empty death to their own ends, pointing her followers and the divine power she grants towards targets of their own choosing to advance their own agendas while they still live their mortal lives. There is also a small faction among her faithful who worship her simply as a patron of swamps and bogs. This faction is often seen as less representative of her teachings as a whole, and generally consists of swamp-dwelling creatures like marsh giants. These followers have several names for Nhimbaloth, including the Bog Mother, the Rushlight Woman, and the Swampfire Queen. As befitting her eldritch nature, Nhimbaloth has never produced a holy text for her followers. Like many of the outer gods, she is mentioned in the Necronomicon, and that might sometimes be referenced by her followers as a divine text. Ironically, the most definitive text on Nhimbaloth was originally written to combat her influence. Called the Whispering Reeds, this text contains a collection of stories of Nhimbaloth's actions throughout the multiverse, collected by a single author for the express purpose of informing those who oppose the Empty Death's actions. After the text's original publication, however, it became apparent that it was instead the primary source on Nhimbaloth's teachings and lore, and had quickly become the main text her followers referenced to practice her faith. Horrified, the original author sought to destroy all copies of the text they had so far produced, but the cat was already out of the bag, and they were never fully able to put it back. Many who read the text for too long find themselves almost bewitched by the strange, eldritch knowledge it imparts, and the powers described within its pages often seduce those who read the book into following the Empty Death's faith. Through the Whispering Reeds, Nhimbaloth teaches her followers to consume life, and specifically to consume life which has been previously consumed and digested by other beings. This manifests as followers needing to consume predators who have themselves recently consumed a living creature. If you're familiar with Renfield's behavior in the original Dracula novel, it's very similar to that. This practice mirrors Nhimbaloth's own consumption of predators who stalk the River of Souls, but more on that a bit later. Followers often engage in this activity during large feasts, in which the animals who serve as the main course are often cooked while still alive. Cults of Nhimbaloth typically choose one day each year to celebrate the anniversary of the death of Voidbraken, and believe that during one of these celebrations, the rogue planet will approach Golarion, and Nhimbaloth will consume the living souls of Golarion to finally manifest in her physical form. Another practice in which the faithful participate is the creation of incorporeal undead. Nhimbaloth feeds upon souls separated from their bodies, and the creation of ghosts and other such beings is seen as a means of preparing a feast for the Empty Death in preparation for her expected arrival on Golarion. As you might expect from the faith of an outer goddess, Nhimbaloth is rarely worshipped in the open. Her followers are incredibly secretive out of a sense of self-preservation. Those who worship her in larger communities typically practice their faith in private, hidden away in dark basements or dungeons. In smaller, remote communities, especially those located in or around swamps, Nhimbaloth's faith might become influential enough to take over the whole town. In such cases, formal temples or churches might be constructed, though they will likely be disguised as other structures, like mansions or churches to more conventional deities. These purpose-built structures all share one feature in common: a raised tower from which a light source can shine. This might manifest as a simple bell tower with a lantern, or might be more distinctive, like, for instance, a lighthouse. The lights in these structures are meant to represent Will-O-Wisps, who are the eyes of Nhimbaloth, signifying that the Empty Death sees all within the influence of her church. While no nation on Golarion is a notable stronghold of faith in the Empty Death, cults devoted to her worship can be found throughout the Inner Sea region. Her faith is most commonly practiced near swamps, bogs, and marshes, as the rot and decay, as well as the presence of will-o-wisps, are all seen as signs of her influence and objects of her interest. One such bog is the Mushfens, a swamp region in southern Varissia which stretches between Korvosa and Magnamar. The Mushfens play host to a wide variety of creatures, including marsh giants, who might worship Nhimbaloth, but more relevant are the will-o-wisps in the region, who often become oracles dedicated to the outer goddess's faith. Nhimbaloth's origins are mysterious at best and entirely unknown at worst. As an outer goddess, she likely exists as a holdover from a previous iteration of the multiverse, meaning she is probably older than Pharasma and the Boneyard. Beyond that, little is known about where Nhimbaloth came from, or how she ascended to divinity. Sometime near the beginning of this iteration of reality, Nhimbaloth came into conflict with another powerful deific entity. Most legends suggest or strongly imply that this other entity was none other than Pharasma herself, though legends from Pharasma's own teachings don't confirm this. The Whispering Reeds claims that the two goddesses fought, and the confrontation only ended when Nhimbaloth's physical form was entirely destroyed. This was not the end of the Empty Death, however, as she simply began to manifest herself in an ethereal and astral form. With the limits of her physical form no longer weighing her down, Nhimbaloth found herself more able to traverse the Great Beyond and the River of Souls. At this point, she took an interest in incorporeal undead, over all other undead types. It's also worth noting that, at least according to the teachings of the Whispering Reeds, Pharasma was supposedly injured in the fight with Nhimbaloth, and she hides the scar from the injury to this day. After the loss of her physical form, Nhimbaloth found herself better able to stalk the shores of the River of Souls. Rather than hunting for souls themselves, however, she sought the predators who consumed them, becoming she who hunts the hunters. Consuming both the hunter and the partially digested souls within them was her greatest pleasure. She also moved her realm, the dead planet Voidbracken, through the material plane. As she approached inhabited planets, her influence would draw souls from their bodies for her consumption. After consuming the souls of entire planets, Nhimbaloth found herself able to temporarily manifest a shell of her physical form, leading to legends among her faithful that the consumption of enough souls will eventually allow the permanent return of her physical body. Legends of Nhimbaloth are relatively rare on Golarion due to the scarcity of her cult, but one fact which is known among both her followers and enemies is her connection to Will-O-Wisps. Nhimbaloth is suspected by some scholars to have been the creator of the Will-O-Wisps as a species. Her faith teaches that wisps are her eyes, and wherever they are, her presence is not far behind. Many Will-O-Wisps are known to devote themselves to Nhimbaloth's faith, and more than a few have become oracles infused with her divine power. I should also mention that Nhimbaloth has a very strong connection to the Abomination Vault's adventure path. I don't know if I would consider her involvement a spoiler, but I'll refrain from going into too much detail here for fear of ruining your experience with that campaign. Nhimbaloth, as a goddess of undeath who has an ancient and ongoing personal beef with Pharasma, is broadly opposed by the Lady of Graves and her allies. That said, Pharasma and her most powerful clerics recognize the danger posed by Nhimbaloth and her faith. Due to the seductive powers of the Whispering Reeds, which is still the premier text on familiarizing oneself with the methods of opposing Nhimbaloth, the Pharasman Church is careful to restrict access to the text to only the best trained and most devout followers. For that reason, the Pharasman Church will rarely take up large-scale operations in opposition to Nhimbaloth or her followers, but individual priests and followers will take up personal quests against such villains, if they come across them in the wild. Gozrah, a deity with relatively few hated enemies, actively opposes Nhimbaloth and her efforts. The wind and the waves sees the Empty Death's corruption of swampland as an affront to nature. Bogs subjected to Nhimbaloth's influence often become places dominated by death and decay, haunted by lingering malevolent spirits. These places are antithetical to all forms of life beyond fungus and rot, and Gozrah passionately opposes this. Desna also opposes Nhimbaloth, though her concern is far more personal. Nhimbaloth and her followers tend to be active at night in the wild places of the world, making it fairly likely that they could run into Desna's followers who generally travel at night. Many Desnans have been ambushed and sacrificed by Nhimbaloth's faithful, or lured to their deaths by Will-O-Wisps. For this reason, Desna has aimed her efforts to make the night a safe place squarely at Nhimbaloth and her followers, similar to her opposition to Zon-Kuthon. Much like both Desna and Gozrah, the eldest of the First World actively oppose Nhimbaloth's efforts in their territory. The Empty Death's corruption has extended into swamps of the First World on more than one occasion, encroaching into the kingdoms of the eldest. This, coupled with the corruption of bogs on the material plane where Fae commonly live, has drawn the lasting ire of the eldest and their Fae servitors. Finally, I want to do a little speculation. Nhimbaloth has interest in the corruption of swamps, the proliferation of undeath, and the creation of Will-O-Wisps, putting her almost diametrically opposed to Ashava, the imperial lord of dance. Ashava actively opposes all Will-O-Wisps, and the most famous of her legends tells a tale of her defeat of the first Will-O-Wisp, Lady Rushlight. Ashava also encourages non-violent confrontations with undead to allow restless spirits to find peace and move on. She also seeks to make swamps and bogs places of peace and safety, especially at night. All of this is absolutely antithetical to the teachings of Nhimbaloth, and the overlaps between the two faiths make fertile ground for a heated rivalry. Neither faith is exceptionally large on Golarion, meaning their rivalry would likely only ever flare up on rare occasions. As another point of discussion, Ashava is substantially less powerful than Nhimbaloth, meaning direct confrontation between the two deities would be horribly one-sided. This sets up a compelling conflict which followers of each deity could take incredibly personally, leading to some seriously rich roleplay potential. For players interested in playing characters who follow Nhimbaloth, here are some useful details. For those using the alignment rules, Nhimbaloth is chaotic evil, and will only accept clerics of that alignment. Her edicts are to create undead, and especially incorporeal undead, and to feast upon carnivores that have recently feasted upon others. Unlike most deities, Nhimbaloth has no anathema, as she takes little interest in providing information or restrictions to her followers. Her holy symbol is a skull with moss growing from its mouth. Her domains are decay, nature, undeath, and void. She also has the alternate domains of abominations and delirium. Nhimbaloth's sacred colors seem to be dark green and dark gray. These colors are worn by the leaders of her cults, and are paired with drapings of moss and other plant and animal material native to swamps and bogs. Leaders also wear masks in the shape of skulls and adorned with moss, calling to mind their goddess's holy symbol. Cult members of lower rank instead wear their death clothes when they perform their sacred rituals and rites. By death clothes, I mean whatever clothing corpses are dressed in before they are buried or burned in the region where the cult is active. Nhimbaloth's favored weapon is the flail, though she does little in the way of dictating fighting styles to her followers. In addition to the flail, I could see followers employing weapons which serve a purpose in helping navigate swamps. Things like spears or staves to vault between rocks, or whips to function as a rope to help pull oneself to safety. Followers in more urban settings likely need to hide their faith, and might tend toward weapons with the concealable trait as a result. Nhimbaloth has no listed favored animal. I suspect followers will tend toward swamp-dwelling or amphibious creatures, or toward apex predators in their choice of familiar or animal companion. This is speculation on my part, but I think it's rooted in the established lore. Followers of Nhimbaloth are almost always cultists operating in the shadows. Clerics are likely the leaders of these cults, and I suspect that cloistered clerics tend to be more common than war priests. Rangers and druids devoted to Nhimbaloth might excel in the swamps where her followers are most common, and the same could be said of characters with the Horizon Walker archetype. Sorcerers with the undead or aberrant bloodlines are likely represented among her faithful as well, especially in one famous case which I am not naming for spoiler reasons. As cultists to an eldritch deity, many followers might take feats from the ritualist archetype, while the living vessel archetype might be perfect for characters who play host to a spiritual servant of Nhimbaloth, or even an aspect of the dark goddess herself. There don't appear to be any meaningful breakdowns in the ancestral makeup of Nhimbaloth's faithful. She has no preference for one ancestry or another, and the small differences between the ancestries of Golarion are largely beneath her notice. That said, Nephilim, whose extraplanar influence stems from the eldritch deities of the Dark Tapestry, might be particularly drawn to Nhimbaloth's faith. Additionally, planar scions of water, wood, or earth might be drawn to the Empty Death's association with swamps and bogs. I also suspect that hags who live in swamps might easily find themselves drawn to the faith of Nhimbaloth, and a few changelings might find their way to her church as a result. Again, though, Nhimbaloth doesn't especially care who follows her, so members of nearly any ancestry could reasonably be found among her faithful. For GMs looking to integrate Nhimbaloth and her followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. Nhimbaloth has no herald that I could find, which makes sense based on her limited interest in providing guidance or direct aid to her followers. Instead, she has multiple notable servitors on the material plane, who act relatively independently. The most notable are the already mentioned Will-O-Wisps, who are supposedly the eyes of Nhimbaloth, and who revel in luring travelers to their deaths in swamps. Flicker-Wisps, a lesser relative to the Will-O-Wisp, are also seen as representatives of the Empty Death, and their ability to cause confusion in the minds of their victims is seen as channeling the touch of Nhimbaloth. Void Gluttons, another subspecies of wisp, are seen as manifestations of Nhimbaloth's unending hunger for souls. Other wisps, like the Corpse Light or the Dread Wisp, could reasonably also be seen as servants of Nhimbaloth, though this hasn't been officially stated anywhere by Paizo. The best location I can think of to host an adventure featuring Nhimbaloth is, of course, the Mushfens. This huge swamp features a large number of interesting and powerful threats, from the aforementioned marsh giants to boggards, wisps, hags, and all manner of other magical beasts. Additionally, the Mushfens exist on the sunken remains of Eurythnia, one of the 7 kingdoms of ancient Thassalon. Ruins from Eurythnia dot the landscape of the Mushfens, and many of these are still filled with all manner of ancient and powerful magic and artifacts. A cult of Nhimbaloth might easily take root in these ruins and begin a hunt for sources of Thassalonian power. This might lead them deeper into the swamps, or might force them to send field agents into other parts of Varisia to acquire research materials. This could put them into conflict with PCs and draw the party's attention to the Mushfens themselves, kicking off an adventure which mixes elements of wilderness exploration with dungeon delving in a fun and interesting way. On a smaller scale, cultists of Nhimbaloth could easily feature in any campaign where players are geographically close to swamps or marshlands. The upcoming AP Spore War might be a good opportunity for this, as Tree Razor's home of Tanglebriar is a swamp which could very easily host a cult of Nhimbaloth. Another opportunity might be found in Wardens of Wildwood, where the unlife-infused marsh region of the Verduran Forest, called the Dead Grove, is the perfect location for the followers of the Empty Death to take root. The relative flexibility of Nhimbaloth's teachings allows her followers to fit into a wide variety of plot lines, as they could reasonably involve themselves in any number of events so long as it allows them to create more incorporeal undead or acquire further power for themselves. Finally, a GM could easily construct a compelling high-level adventure around a hunt for cultists of Nhimbaloth, as conducted by the Church of Pharasma and its allies. The tendency of the Church to entrust these duties only to its most powerful and loyal priests means that this would likely feature a party of high-level players. In addition to followers of Pharasma, PCs might be followers of other deities of death who ally with the Lady of Graves. These might include Mogrim or Ashava, or any of Pharasma's Psychopomp's servants. The Church might also reach out to followers of Gozra or Desna, for reasons I mentioned earlier in this video. This adventure could take place in either a wild or urban environment. Marshes or bogs would lend themselves toward a standard wilderness exploration campaign, while an urban story would lean harder into the themes of intrigue and eldritch investigation. GMs for an urban story could draw inspiration from classic tales of eldritch horror, like The Shadow over Innsmouth, or could take a look at the Call of Cthulhu RPG, or Paizo's own Strange Aeons adventure path. So, that's it. That's Nhimbaloth, the Empty Death. She's the first outer god I've covered on this channel, and I'm kind of glad I started with her. Full disclosure, I am not a fan of eldritch horror. I've tried to vibe with the genre a few times, and it just doesn't click for me. As a result, cosmic horror elements have always felt a little out of place to me on Golarion, and I've struggled to understand the appeal. That said, Nhimbaloth is something of an exception. Maybe it's because she's an original creation for the Paizoverse, or maybe it's her relatively grounded interest in swamps and the consumption of souls. Either way, I find her fairly compelling as a villain, and she is the rare instance of eldritch horror which I generally enjoy. Up next, the month of spooks and scares continues with another video player's guide. My So You Want to Play series continues next week with a look at one of Paizo's 6-part APs, and one which features a very different type of horror than the subject of today's video. Next week is the Bloodlord's Adventure Path, set in the undead nation of Geb. See you next time.